Hope you enjoyed that keynote interview with Tammy Irwin of Verizon Business. And now we've got a great panel discussion for you where we're going to dissect private networks and see what's going on globally and what the opportunity is for operators in that regard. And we've got a great expert panel for you today. It's a pleasure to introduce Dean Bubley, founder of Disruptive Analysis, Guy Hilton, who's the head of PlatformX Business and Strategy with Amdocs, and Peter Clemons, Vice President of Standards for the European Users Wireless Enterprise Network Association, EUWENA. So gentlemen, thank you all for joining today.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to be here, sure.
There's been a thread throughout the sessions today, and that's the need for operators to develop strategic partnerships and make sure they're investing in ecosystem development. So I thought maybe to frame our conversation around 5G monetization, you all could share some thoughts around what you see operators doing correctly, what you see them doing wrong with regard to delivering 5G-based solutions into enterprise. So Dean, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. I think there's a couple of things here. First off, to say that private networks aren't new. I saw my first enterprise small cell 20 years ago. So we've had private 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G. So I think it's important to get that context. And to some extent, we're seeing a democratization of private networks and enterprise cellular of various sorts, but it's been around for a while. And I think that what I'm seeing at the moment is a bit of a shift from the one network to rule them all vision from maybe 2-3 years ago, where there's this idea that there'd be one 5G network built out by 2020 and it would be sliced 1,000 ways for enterprises. And in fact, the reality is a lot more nuanced, and that rather than thinking of national networks as platforms, we're starting to see two things happening. First thing is that operators, traditional mobile operators, the normal big carriers that we think of as telcos in this space, are starting to develop customized products, perhaps through their systems integration units, for enterprises, either with partners or perhaps partnering the other way around, so they're secondary rather than primary. And I'm seeing that it may even be a specific dedicated local network that the operators are doing. The other thing I'm seeing is a broadening of the definition of the word operator. And I think everyone talks about 5G being transformational for a lot of industries, but what they don't recognize is the first industry which gets transformed is the telecoms industry. And what we're starting to see is a huge explosion of new service provider types, or network owning and integrating and operating types. So as well as the sort of MVNOs of the past, we've got dedicated industrial or vertical operators, you've got bits of government and local authorities building networks, industrial automation providers acting as service providers, tower cos that are building and operating networks, fiber cos that are building and operating 4G and 5G networks, and a long list of others. So I think that's a really interesting trend of what we thought of as a mobile operator 5 years ago. That's just part of the story these days.
Guy, what's the view from Amdocs? I know you're working with all of your operator customers to propel them down this path. What's some learnings you could share?
So I think there's a couple of things, and I completely agree with Dean about 5G being transformational. And I think what we mostly hear is, so what lies beyond connectivity? I think connectivity, and I couldn't agree more with Dean, has been around for a long time, had different names, different paths to actually explore it. But at the end of the day, the majority of what the operators were offering is a connectivity-based solution one way or the other. And the discussion today is, what can we offer beyond it? Where's the value for the B2B sector, enterprises in specific, that 5G can harness into it? And you start looking at different value-added elements that are sometimes even beyond connectivity, goes into significantly a larger amount of partnerships. It goes into sort of either offering an ecosystem that comes along with your connectivity play, or joining an existing one and enhancing it with the connectivity that you can offer. but it's no more. It's less of an island approach these days. It's much more of how can we open up and be part of this newly formed ecosystem where there are a lot of different players that are now stepping in to also offer connectivity. So how do we differentiate ourselves in such a big manner?
Yeah.
And Peter, we'll talk a little later about the workings of EUWENA, but maybe just to start, you could give us that enterprise perspective, that buyer perspective in terms of what are their primary considerations as they look at what's available to them.
Yeah, I think so. So I agree with what Dean said, that private networks go back a long, long way. I mean, I've been in private networks now for close to 30 years. And they were very much professional mobile networks, so narrow band, push to talk, kind of very bespoke type solutions. I can remember 30 years ago that when GSM came along, everybody said, "Oh, that's the end of PMR, because the GSM will replace all of the PMR networks," and it didn't happen then. When LTE came along, again, I think there was a big push to provide solutions for verticals. But the traditional mobile operator model kind of didn't really kind of fit into some of the very specialized applications that enterprises, industries, certain verticals kind of have. So 5G is a new opportunity, but I think we all realize it's going to take some time to kind of build out the full functionality of 5G. So enterprises are really looking for specialized solutions. And I think what is interesting now is actually that rather than the mobile operators, we're starting to see more specialized systems integrators. Perhaps those systems integrators also have a particular expertise or are much closer to the customers than the mobile operators are. I mean, the mobile operators are not sitting on their hands, I guess. They have kind of perhaps rather belatedly started to set up their own divisions and started to hire kind of more specialized people within that. But I think, yeah, basically now there is another opportunity, but it's never an either or as Dean says, kind of one network to rule them all or one solution that will rule them all. I mean, enterprises have to keep the lights on. They have to deliver value to their customers. They have to deliver the solutions that their customers are expecting, and they will they need they need partners that they can trust for that journey.
So, Dean, throughout the program today, I think we've had some fairly grounded, sober conversations about what's going to be possible with 5G near term. But when you start to look at longer term, more broad marketing about 5G from the telecom sector, it's almost billed as a, whatever your business problem is, 5G is going to fix it for you. I love following you on Twitter and LinkedIn because you provide a very precise, very clear-eyed reality check as to what you think is going to be capable with 5G. And that kind of comes down to a hashtag I've seen you use, 5G, just another G. So, I mean, what's realistic in terms of 5G as an enabler of tangible business value in the short term?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, I've used that phrase for a while, and yeah, I still think that it's, apart from anything else, 4G is not going to be disappearing anytime soon, and a lot of enterprise cellular uses it, whether on premise or across the wide area. So I think that 5G, first off, as you know, it comes in phases. So the 5G we have today really is, it's not even another G. It's 4. It's essentially an evolved version of 4G with the same core network. We're only just starting to get 5G standalone networks deployed, and even then, Release 15 doesn't really have all the cool features that Release 16 and Release 17 and 18 will have over the coming 3, 4, 5, 6 years. So I think that's a journey, and I think that for a lot of enterprises, up to a point, that's okay, because some enterprises will experiment with the early versions of 5G. They might set up a small pilot project with perhaps a few video cameras or a robot or one area of one building or one factory, and then over time expand, and they will know what the roadmap has as well. But I think it's important to say that 5G won't be in isolation. At the same time, Wi-Fi is evolving from 6 to 6E to 7 and beyond. We've got new technologies, whether that's at the for a wide area like LEO satellite constellations. Obviously, there's more fiber everywhere, and there's a lot of other older technologies, Tetra and other PMR systems that I know Peter would talk about, as well as the legacy industrial protocols in a lot of cases. One of the issues for 5G is that the industry has this tendency to sort of turn up as if it's suddenly invented connectivity to an enterprise. Guys, we've got this solution, without realizing that there's like 5, 10, 20, 30 years of legacy. And that, at least to begin with, 5G is the incremental add-on. And it has to play nicely with everything that's there. Now, it's a bit different. If you're building a greenfield, maybe you're Amazon building your 97th warehouse somewhere, and you're buying new robots, and you've got new fiber in there, and you've got a new facility. But that's the exception, not the rule. And I think that what I don't think the mobile industry has quite grasped is that they have to play nicely with the incumbent technology, whether that's the IT, the OT operational technology, whether it's Wi-Fi's, AI ops and cloud-based management systems, all of the IP stuff, DHCP and firewalls, and all the sort of stuff that people run day in, day out. And I think that's something that the industry is going to struggle with a bit, is to how to slot into the existing domain. And there will be greenfield, and there will be some that are 5G primary. But I think that's, at least to begin with, can be the exception.
So, Guy, Dean pointed out a few of the issues that are going to have to be addressed in this process. I'll throw a few more into the mix. Spectrum access liberalization, like we see in the US with CBRS, or Germany with that 3.6 set aside. Then you've got this emphasis on open networking systems, as well as distributed cloud that needs to be integrated with network, integrated with enterprise cloud investments. So I guess the point is that there's a lot of choices for an enterprise buyer, and there's also a lot of complexity. So, what are your thoughts on how they need to address all of this and make sense of it, make good decisions?
So I think it's a great question. I would start probably by maybe not treating all enterprises as one. I think it depends on the size. It depends on also the region. It depends on the availability of what solutions can I actually get from whomever is supplying them to me. And I think that, if Dean used one network to rule them all, I would say that with great power comes great responsibility, in the sense that you want to create an ecosystem. You want to create a myriad of solutions that enterprises can harness. But then think about the IT person who now is tasked, let's say, with getting a security perimeter around one of the enterprise campuses. So there's security cameras, and there's drones, and there's connectivity, and there's a bunch of other things there. And with more dispersed type of offerings, it's going to be hard to do the best of breed. Now, if you're a small enterprise, you might want to go to an aggregator, could be an operator, or could be one of the new players, and try to get everything in one go from such a person, or from such a company. If you're actually a large enterprise and you have a lot of legacy and a lot of integrations you need to do, then the best of breed might be best for you, and you want to pick and choose and get those. But at the end of the day, what we're probably going to see is an evolution, not because of the connectivity play, but because of the amount of applications and solutions that now can ride on top of connectivity. And these are tenfold bigger and larger than what we saw in previous generations. So the ability to go potentially into either a marketplace or a mini store, or whatever the term might be, and pick and choose from 5 different verticals or solutions that are there, that have been either pre-integrated, tested, and so on, and it takes some of the overhead and headache away from you as an enterprise buyer. I think that would go a long way as we progress into more 5G.
So, Peter, I think now is maybe an opportune moment to get a little background on EUWENA as we discuss kind of building bridges from verticals to telecom. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the organization, some of its goals, and I'd also note that the ball is in your court in terms of making a Lord of the Rings reference.
Yeah, I'm not particularly a big Lord of the Rings fan, but okay, so I think we've realized now that kind of there's no kind of enterprises are quite a diverse bunch of organizations. And also their main focus is not actually the telecoms industry or even connectivity, but it's actually focusing on their core business, I guess. So I think I'll take this looking at the 4 working groups that we've set up, just to give you an idea of kind of what we're doing, what we're trying to do, and kind of where we're going. So I'm heading up the standards working group. So I'm a member of ETSI and 3GPP, which is interesting. So basically what we need to defend standards, global standards, because I mean that's the whole point of moving away from bespoke solutions that tended to be very expensive, and you tended to get tied into one particularly very large supplier that bought up all the other suppliers, and eventually you ended up being the only one. So global standards are important. And the second working group that we have is Spectrum. And I think really Spectrum drives a lot of what we're trying to do. So we've had a lot of interactions with the European Commission, with CEPT, RSPG. And what tends to happen at a national and a European level is that there's a degree of regulatory capture by mobile operators, for example, or the larger suppliers. And they have traditionally kind of carved up all of the globally standard or regionally standardized spectrum just for themselves. So we had a lot of feedback from the European Commission that there wasn't really a voice for the enterprise business community. So I think as a group of consultants, systems integrators, etc., we thought that EUWENA was a perfect opportunity to act as a catalyst and to kind of bring together a lot of the needs and hopes of the different enterprises and verticals. The third working group is associations. So actually, what I didn't mention was that, so the heading up the Spectrum group is Strict Consulting's Antoine van der Stijs, who is Dutch. Our secretary, Koen Miolet, who many of you kind of may know, he also has a long background in PMR, in private networks, is heading up. So we have an associations working group. So we're not trying to invent the wheel. We're not competing against any of the other associations. What we want to do is complement, work together, and kind of fill any gaps that there might be within the private networks framework. So we're looking to work with TCCA. So I'm a former director and board member of the Critical Communications Association that worked traditionally in public safety, but has also worked in some other areas. There are 5G ASEAs, etc., etc. So we will be looking to work together with them, lobby with them, conduct certain activities with them. And then the fourth working group is run by Sean McGinley, who works for an Irish specialized systems integrator, Sigma Wireless. And so the whole ecosystem, kind of part of that, is to provide a single point of information for this diverse ecosystem of enterprises and industries. So we will bring together information about the solutions, the suppliers, etc., etc. So it's quite a big remit. But I think that gives you an idea of kind of what we're trying to achieve and a lot of the activities that we'll be providing kind of later on, as it's a new association as well. So you can find more information. The website is very easy. It's EUWENA.eu. So there's more information there for anybody who is interested in getting involved and helping us out on any of the working groups.
Great. Thank you for that overview, Peter. Dean, I wanted to circle back to something we discussed in our prep call and that you briefly mentioned earlier, but this idea that network slicing is a viable way to get connectivity out to an enterprise isn't necessarily going to hinge on an operator standing up a nationwide core. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you see going on around more localized standalone deployments in support of very specific types of customers.
I think that one of the things that we're likely to see is small scale 5G networks, whether they're deployed by an enterprise, a systems integrator, or an arm of a carrier, move faster through the releases, the 3GPP releases. So you're going to get to 15 standalone, probably 16, and then 17 at a local level with a smaller, well-defined coverage area and perhaps specifically bought devices and more manageability. And I think that given that a lot of the features enterprises want are in the later releases, so in release 16 and release 17, you've got whether it's network slicing, whether you've got specific features for verticals. There's actually, I think the thing which doesn't get talked about enough is the accurate positioning, which comes in 16, 17 progressively. So you can imagine a robot in a factory that needs to get back to its charging dock, and it needs to be 1 to 10 centimeters accurate. And it could use cameras, it could use LiDAR, but maybe it will use the wireless. And I think, the same thing if you've got a shelf robot that needs to get to, bay 7, shelf number 5, whatever. So I think that there's some of the later features. And I think that what we'll see then is the carriers starting to recognize that, and maybe their main network will be able to scale down. I'm not so sure. I think you're already starting to see them deploying separate core networks, separate radio networks. Sometimes they will own the asset, sometimes the enterprise will own the asset, sometimes an integrator or an outsourcer will own the asset. So there's different business models there. And I also think that another driver that's coming in there is from the competitive side. If you look at what's been announced by AWS recently and Cisco recently about essentially private 5G as a service with low capex, and essentially whether it's pay per device or pay per traffic or pay per SIM, there's that type of cloud-based as a service model really doesn't fit very well with traditional macro national networks. And it may well be that the billing model you have for a mine is different from the billing model you have for a neutral host network in a hotel or something like that. And I think that type of flexibility, obviously, I've got a guy here from Amdocs, so I'm not going to sort of talk BSS without Amdocs having a view on it, I'm sure. But I think that is going to happen. Now, question then is whether you call that slicing. I think this term slicing is going to get massively devalued over the next few years. You're already seeing this. Everything's a slice. It's a QoS class. I'll call it a slice. Oh, it's an MVNO. Call it a slice. And I think that within about 12 months, either we'll view slice as just this ubiquitous term like wireless, and it's just it applies to 19 different definitions, or we'll all be cringing at it. And I think by the time we actually get the official 3GPP release 16 and 17 slicing, it'll be such lost in the blur of misuse of that term, in much the same way that 5G is in some ways. And I think there's an interesting challenge as well is how you map 5G slices to all of the other ways of dividing up enterprise networks. So whether it's the VLAN, from an Ethernet or Wi-Fi speed, whether it's the class as a service in various parts of the network, how you map it onto all the IP capability that's in the background that the enterprise CIO and network managers are doing. I think that sort of mapping of tech A to platform B is going to be an interesting challenge.
Guy, I saw you nodding enthusiastically there during Dean's comments. Earlier in the program, we got a pretty deep dive into end-to-end orchestration for network slices from your colleague Olive Goldner. But just maybe if you could continue Dean's comments there that you were agreeing with, just what is a realistic expectation for how slices will be used in the near term, if not to explicitly generate new service revenue from a buyer, even just from the operator perspective to gain some sort of efficiency around spectral or network resource allocation?
So first of all, I do agree, and I think it is an overused word because currently network slicing is used for anything in a network and all the way up till world peace, and everything can be done with network slicing. And I think it's a bit misleading. When you think about it, there's going to be, as usual, with overhyped or hyped sort of features coming out in different releases, there's going to be a learning curve. Where does it really fit? Where are the actual use cases and actual ways that we can derive value of it? And I'll give you an example. With different conversations that we have, it seems like there's a bit of potentially misinterpretation of what network slicing is. So people think, oh, it's a dedicated quality of service, so therefore I get my own network slice for eternity, and it's always there, and I can use it for whatever I want. And it's almost like the quality of service guarantee you were promised at 4G to a certain extent. I see it in a slightly different way. I think this is there for those significant peaks, not on a daily basis when we have a peak in a network, but in a specific use case. So, and I'll just give maybe a security use case. So you have 60 cameras in the perimeter surrounding your campus, and they do regular HD, surveillance. Suddenly you spot a movement in section whatever A2, and you want to zoom in and get 4K over there for the next 30 minutes because there's something happening there. This is where network slicing, I think, would fit better as a use case rather than, I'll just get 4K across the entire network all the time at any given moment. You want to zoom in, get back, and get that slice done somewhere else. Gaming is another good example, although I think it's slightly overused. Everybody talks about those crucial points in a game where you want to have that extra quality of service to have better ping time or whatever, so you can get that as a game developer, not necessarily as the gaming user at the end. And there are many more. So I think as time goes by, we'll see where it better fits, and then also where it's just going to be another word that doesn't really generate a lot of value. But regardless, and that was the second part of your question, is it a monetization element that you can basically charge an add-on fee because you're using network slicing? I think that it's going to be a differentiation factor for service providers to be able to use it. I'm not sure it's a chargeable element by itself, but it definitely would create significant additional value that could be monetized in a larger context. I don't think people will pay additional significant dollars just to get network slices, but if it's there to serve a purpose, then it makes sense. So it's all value derived rather than technology derived in my mind.
So, Peter, I turn to you. The last time I spoke with your colleague, Christian, the president of EUWENA, he was discussing how operators that are accustomed to building macro national networks really struggle to scale down to meet the needs of an enterprise. And they also struggle to align what the network can do with what the enterprise's desired business outcomes are. We're 6 hours into a program that's featured a good deal of commentary from operators and vendors about the progress they're making in right-sizing their offerings for enterprise. I'm just curious, from your perspective, are they making material progress?
Mobile operators clearly have a role to play within this, and there will be industries, there will be enterprises that are happy to take some kind of subscription, maybe even a slice from the mobile operator. And I think you had Tammy on earlier with Verizon. There's Orange, Vodafone. They're talking a lot about this. But then returning to the slicing, enterprises many enterprises will be building their own private networks, and there's a reason for them building their own private networks, because they have dedicated resources, they have control, there may be privacy issues, kind of data sovereignty issues, etc., etc. So if we look at the slicing, I think interestingly, kind of even within the private networks, there's LTE, but now I think maybe one of the more interesting aspects now of 5G is just simply the quality of service and the options for differentiation within your own private network. So you will be able to run the mission critical applications now over the same dedicated network as you run a lot of the administrative tasks. So this is already starting to kind of change the business model. If you are paying money to build and run your own private network, are you going to then pay additional sums of money to a network operator to offer you a slice? And then how is that network slice going to be integrated into the operations of your own private network? So I am a member of 3GPP, and I sit through very laborious kind of days of discussions between the Qualcomms and the Ericssons and the BTs and the Verizons. And the number of enterprises, the number of verticals, the number of industries within 3GPP has grown exponentially in recent times. But there's not really enough bandwidth, there's not really enough time to discuss some of these kind of issues. I think you're looking at the eSIM solutions. I think even just recently I saw that Druid Software, for example, is offering kind of eSIM solutions. There are multi-SIM solutions that are coming along. And if you have your own dedicated network, you have your own operations, then, as I say, a little bit like in the old days, that the GSM operators did take some of the low-hanging fruit. There were some taxi companies, perhaps, who thought, okay, there's a good enough coverage in my town or city. But in the end, they will have their role, but I think really they will focus on their role of offering the roaming that we need. So we will need roaming, and they will have to make that as simple as possible. And yet we'll pay for that type of service as we pay as kind of customers at the moment. So mobile operators have their role. I think actually the specialized systems integrators will have a larger role to play within the kind of particularly the business critical private network space.
Dean, you have a...
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that you'll find some operators will go deep and specialize on particular verticals. So Telstra in Australia has a mining services division. TELUS in Canada, I think there's a lot on healthcare. Verizon in the US bought a logistics technology, telematics company. So I think that you're going to find more of that. But is it going to be multiple verticals across all of their operating companies across the entire territory? I think that they'll pick and choose. I'm sure you'll see Deutsche Telekom in Germany do a lot on manufacturing, for example. But there's also going to be some specialist service providers. So you've got ones like Tampnet that does services for oil and gas, and they get offshore spectrum for that particular vertical, whether it's for 4G or 5G. And I think that there's going to be an interesting other dynamic here, which is whether operators become buyers or sellers for platform offers. The assumption is that they're the seller, they're the platform. But platform offers are not, firstly, everyone wants to be a platform. Secondly, most people don't realize that to be a platform, you probably have to put 30 to 40% revenue towards marketing, developer, and ecosystem management. And I've very rarely met people at telcos who hire people whose job is to help other people make money. and who actually go out and say, this is our solution. You can produce more widgets in your factory, get better yield from your agriculture, have safer operations on your railway, whatever it is. And that's what, if you go back to looking at platforms like the way that operating system, Microsoft or databases, Oracle back in the day, this sort of thing, they have people whose job was sort of that type of ecosystem, sort of nourishment, if you like. And I think that's a challenge as well for the operators. But that doesn't mean that they won't have ecosystems, but they might be ecosystems of specialist integrators or specialist consultants and partners, that can deal with manufacturing. There's going to be, and it's a bit like the IT industry, where in some markets you'll find IBM is the lead system integrator, and in other cases they're subcontractors to someone else with specialism. And I think that there's going to have to be a little bit of a loosening of ego, that they're not always going to be at the top of the food chain, and sometimes they're going to be providing perhaps an atomized service. It could be eSIM management as a service, multi-tenant core network as a service, radio planning as a service, NOC, Network Operations Center as a service. And I think interesting questions can be whether they're prepared to atomize some of the offers and bring them into third parties' platforms, and they're actually using that as a multiplier.
Well, that's a good segue, Guy, because you made a comment about platforms during our prep call that I wanted to revisit. I think you essentially said that the goal for all of this is selling value. Selling value requires a platform. So maybe you can expand on that for the audience and contextualize what it means for the evolution service providers are going through.
Sure. We probably need to first start and understand that on a macro trend level, regardless of what's happening in the telecom industry by itself, the world is moving to a platform-based approach. So if you look at different verticals and different sectors, the need to adopt an ecosystem play is quite evident. Even most of the surveys across probably every research company shows different data that shows that essentially everybody's either looking at a platform or, as Dean said, wants to become a platform. If you look at even the number of unicorns you have today across a given year, and you see how many of them are actually offering some sort of a platform play, it's the majority. So as a given, cross-vertical, regardless of what's happening in telecom, everybody's moving to a platform ecosystem play. So that's one thing. Second thing is, if you think about what's happening in the telecom in specific, and if you look at what 5G would bring, then there is also evolution of that vertical from a silo to called a sort of a platform. Think about connectivity. So you're moving from static to a programmable network. You move the compute power from being appliance-based to cloud and the edge. The data, once internal, potentially is going to be exposed. And if you look at the software approach, then it's more about APIs, intent data, automated, AI, machine learning, and so on. So by definition, regardless of whether you're in the game or not, you're being moved slowly but surely to the ecosystem platform play. And I think as 5G is one of the catalysts for our industry, then definitely it's something to look at. Now, I agree. Is it something that you asked at the beginning of our panel here, what are service providers doing well, and where should they gear up to do something slightly different, or a variation of that question? And I think this is probably one of the key points, that a mindset shift is probably something that is needed here. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be a game of ecosystem and platforms. Now, they might be leading some, as Intel on an atomization level. They might be doing something a bit more granular, or they'll try to do as much of a horizontal play as possible. But whether they lead some of this or participate in other ecosystems as an enabler, this is definitely something that we'll see more and more happening. And if you think about it, as time goes by, service providers are playing in a game where they're not alone in that market anymore, and market conditions would require them to participate and play in a certain manner. So it's not potentially, in my mind, a question of whether should we do it or not. It's going to be a necessity of being part of the ecosystems, leading some and so on. And it looks at, and also moves into their evolution as an operator, from a connectivity provider. It probably is going to evolve to a solution provider. And I think the end state might be a solution enabler, where you have certain assets that are open through APIs or so on. And there is a community around you that harnesses those assets and build on top of that. And then together you go into an enterprise or a consumer and offer these together, which is much more than just I'll partner with 3 or 4 or 10, 20 select partners. It's really an open system. Is it going to happen tomorrow morning? Probably not, but it's definitely a journey that we see is going to happen. And I think market forces will propel that forward.
We'll have to leave it there today, gentlemen, but I do really appreciate you all taking the time to join this conversation and share your perspective with our audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Yep, thank you. Time for bed now. So, yeah.